I want to go back to the issue, the ugly rise of anti-Semitism in our country. Yesterday, I spoke at some length about the lockdown of the National Gallery of Victoria on Sunday in the face of an ugly pro-Palestinian rally. A lot of critics of that, and the Victorian government's been dragged and kicking and screaming to say it shouldn't have happened. Well, it looks like it's going to be Sydney's turn this weekend. Now, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns, unlike some of his other state Labor counterparts, I think he's shown pretty good leadership. And that was evident yesterday when he said in regard to a march on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, categorically no to a planned Palestine rally where they wanted to march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge on Sunday. Now, Chris Minns said, quote, "We cannot allow Sydney to descend into chaos." And he's absolutely right, of course. And I've got some news on the police view about this in a second. But then this morning, here we go, the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, who's still in that job unbelievably, she hit back telling The Guardian, who else, that, quote, "It would be an incredibly powerful symbol for our most iconic landmark to be the site of a demonstration against starvation in Gaza and in favour of lasting peace." She is absolutely out of her depth and ill-informed. Joining me now to discuss this, the co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. We've talked to him on a regular basis, Alex Rivchin. Alex, good to see you again.
Good evening, Steve.
I'll get on to Clover Moore in a moment, but, I mean, the Premier said, no, this is not going to happen, but he left it up to the New South Wales Police as to whether they would issue a permit, because in your state, you have to have a permit to have one of these marches, unlike in Victoria, who won't even do that. I can tell you the police in the last couple of hours have said, no permit, you can't have the march, you're not going to get on the bridge.
Well, look, common sense prevails, and there is obviously a right to peaceful protest in this country. But these protesters, these particular brand of activists, think that it's unlimited right for them to do whatever they want to do. They think it's a right for them to hold up the posters of terrorist leaders, to chant for death in our streets, to support terrorist atrocities as they did in the days after October 7. And they think they have the right to shut down one of the main landmarks in the country and block traffic on the weekend for tens of thousands of people who just want to go about their lives. They are so obnoxious and they are so extreme in their mentality. They need to be stopped. And fortunately, sense has prevailed in this case, and the police have done what's right. They put the interests of the many, of the peace-loving people of Sydney, above that of the fringe.
Jews around Australia, and let alone Jews around the world, are still, upset and reeling from what we witnessed on October 8 at the Opera House. I mean, the two biggest global icons that Australia has is the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It will be absolutely criminal if these people are allowed to get up on that bridge with signs like I saw in Melbourne last weekend, death to the IDF, comparing Benjamin Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler. I mean, we've got to put a stop to this. I mean, what do you make of what Clover Moore had to say?
I think Clover Moore is absolutely kidding herself. I think she's putting her own ideology and politics above the interests of the people that she's supposed to serve. And when she talks about this march being a lovely gesture of peace, peace does not enter the vocabulary of these people. They've never spoken about peace. That's why they were in the streets celebrating immediately after October 7. They celebrate the Houthi drones that hit Tel Aviv and the rockets from Iran. They don't want peace. They want to see the destruction of Israel. And they want to slander the people of the city who are Jewish and who support Israel with every term and every slur imaginable to incite more hatred against us and to destabilize and to divide our cities. And that is why they want to capture another landmark to aid in their aims. Because the bigger the landmark, the bigger the spectacle, the greater their ambitions and ability to achieve what they're seeking to do. So Clover Moore needs to start thinking about the interests of the people of Sydney. But fortunately, again, the maturity of the police has prevailed and this march won't happen on the bridge.
The only thing that I worry about there, Alex, is if the radical left that have infiltrated these protest marches, and, let's be clear, they are radical socialists, they may try to force their way onto the Sydney Harbour Bridge and have a clash with police. And in a sense, that's what these lunatics want. They want global attention. They want national attention. They want people who don't understand the issue to be going, well, come on, you've got to allow us to protest because look at what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. I mean, that worries me that might happen anyway on Sunday.
Look, it's true. And these people in their immaturity, they seek that emotional gratification. They want to be seen to be standing up for something and fighting for something. It's not about the Palestinians. It's about their own internal emotional nourishment and needs. That's what this is really about for them. And you're quite right. You know, they want a confrontation with the police. They want to throw their bodies limp and be dragged off and to look like great heroes and resistors. But at the end of the day, the police are going to have to think this through. They're going to have to plan accordingly. They've had ample opportunities to correct failings from the past as occurred at the steps of the Opera House, to deal with these people appropriately. There was a belief at that time that if these people were allowed to protest, they would get it out of their system and it would eventually peter out. But instead, the opposite has happened. They've become more extreme, more severe in their actions, more violent in what they seek, and more unlawful in their practices. And we're seeing a transfer from those rallies to the storming of restaurants, to the harassment of people in the streets, to the daubing of public buildings. This is directly stemming from these rallies. So the police need to determine whether we're a state of laws or whether this violent mob with their intentions are allowed to prevail and hold sway over the vast majority of Sydneysiders who are peaceful and law-abiding.
Alex, I just want to talk about Gaza and what's happening there. I mean, clearly the first casualty of any war is absolute truth. We don't know exactly what's going on. We don't have any reporters on the ground there. Yes, there are children and pictures of children that look like they are suffering malnutrition. But I just want to play a bit of the way the Canberra press pack went after opposition leader Susan Lee today on this question of Gaza. It feels to me like some in the media are ramping up the pressure on anyone who does not immediately condemn Israel and say that they should recognise Palestine. Just have a quick look at this.
Can all be resolved by Hamas, who have been keeping terrorists, who have been keeping hostages in tunnels in Gaza since October the 7th.
But you haven't answered my question. Do you believe that
can I just move on?
Sorry, you've been asked twice.
I've said I'm very distressed by the images that I've seen.
But do you believe that that's evidence of starvation?
It's a complex situation on the ground, like everyone. I'm very distressed by the images I've seen.
The Prime Minister said this morning that it was beyond comprehension for Israel to assert that there was no starvation in Gaza. Your reaction to that comment, please?
Well, I've just answered that.
But
of course, we're distressed by the images we see. There is no question.
What do you make of that, Alex?
Well, look, this is the narrative that the press is running with, and they're being amply fueled by images online, some doctored, some from other conflicts, and some are no doubt from the actual scenes of suffering in Gaza. There's no question people are suffering, but to deal with a problem, you have to understand it and deal with it coolly and rationally. And when you have people, for example, like Bob Carr, comparing the situation in Gaza to the starvation by Stalin of 6 to 7 million Ukrainian peasants in the 1930s, where people were literally eating their children from such a desperate state of emaciation and hunger. He compared it to the Warsaw Ghetto, one of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust, from which people were then taken and gassed at Treblinka. It loses all proportion, loses all sense, and our ability to actually process what's happening and deal with it rationally is lost. And the press is there to ask the tough questions, but they also can't fall into these narratives, these one-sided perspectives that are totally devoid of truth and reality.
Alex, good to catch up with you again. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Steve.